I've dragged Harry up to a remote northwestern corner of St Helier, just off Montcochon, to tell him the most unbelievable story. And that story starts with a Russian prince born in 1842. He could trace his ancestry all the way back to the first rulers of Russia. He was born into wealth and he went to the very best school in St Petersburg. And he was so stonkingly bright, he passed out first. And he was offered the very best role a graduate could be offered, personal page to the Tsar. Surely he couldn't refuse that offer. This was no ordinary prince. Refuse he did. He requested to be sent out on military service to the wilds of Siberia. And he spent 5 years exploring out there, making a name for himself, but also fermenting in his mind revolutionary ideas about how he could modernize the Russian state. Those ideas were not welcome, and he was thrown into a Russian prison. 2 years without trial, he finally escaped and he fled to Europe. The Holy Brotherhood, a cult of assassins, on his tail. And he ended up in England, in exile for 30 years, writing articles and books about how to improve Russia. And in 1890, he came to Jersey, the first of 3 visits. Why did he do that? Well, this is the next episode of Hidden Homes, and we're at Bushy Farm to find out.
Jersey is one of the most historically interesting small islands in Europe. But most of what we learn comes through a handful of landmarks. Castles, forts, tunnels. And that matters. But it's not the full story. Because the richest detail sits in the homes. The places where people were born, married, argued, laughed, lost, and carried on. Hidden Homes exist to uncover that missing piece. The human stories underneath the architecture. Not history as a timeline, history as real life. So if you've ever felt disconnected from this island, or curious about who we were before we became who we are, welcome to Hidden Homes. In another episode, I was in a chateau. It's all very nice. This is what I'd definitely call a renovation project. However, Toby's here. Must be more to this than just assassins and a cool story. There's got to be more to it. So Toby.
Yep.
Now mate, there has got to be a reason more than just assassins that you've dragged us up here.
Are you prepared to use your imagination?
Yes mate.
We're stood in the dining room. The dining room of a Jerseyman called Hugh Delahaye. He was a bachelor and he'd been farming this farm for a number of years, and the year was 1880. It was January, it was cold, and it was in fact the very week that across the Atlantic Thomas Edison patented the light bulb. And Hugh was having a big dinner party in this room. All his neighbours were around the table, and they'd been invited because it was the beginning of harvest. And they'd been supporting him in Le Grand Charrue, the big plough.
Oh, I bet they got pissed.
They were pissed indeed, probably on cider. And they were all around a table in this room when Hugh had a little trick up his sleeve. He'd been in town earlier that day and he'd gone to Le Corday's merchant shop on the Esplanade. And on top of the counter, they had 2 huge round potatoes. Really bigger than you'd expect a potato to be. Each had about 15 to 16 eyes, the big sprouts that come out of potatoes. And Hugh said, I've got a dinner party tonight, all the neighbours are coming around, can I buy those off you and show them to the group? And so he brought them back. And when the group were ready, he walked in through that door with those potatoes in his hand. And I imagine the group was suitably impressed because they cut them up into 15 to 16 pieces each around the sprouts that were coming out, the eyes. And they went down to Hugh's coatee in Bushy Farm and they planted them. And then in March, a few months later, Hughes dug up some of these potatoes and he was completely bowled over to see these were a new variety of potatoes he was growing. They were small, they were kidney shaped, and he nurtured them, he harvested them, he brought them down to town, and the owner of the shop that wanted to sell them gave them a name. He called them the Royal Jersey Flukes. Flukes because Hugh was completely lucky to have produced this new type of crop. And that was the birth of the Jersey Royal potato.
So hold on, you're telling me that a bunch of drunk farmers messing about created something that in the end not only benefited the island on an economic level, but also had an impact throughout the world?
Yeah.
Nice. Yes, this house is a project. Yes, it needs work. But there is no denying how pretty it is. 40 years after the Jersey Royal Fluke, in that dining room over there, there were 1,800 smallholdings in Jersey that produced the potato. Now, whilst Jersey traditional homes are sort of similar in the way they're laid out, they all look different depending on the parish they're built in and the granite used in the area, all hand built. And you've got to admit, and there's no denying it, these might be some of the prettiest properties in the world. I just absolutely love them. They're brilliant.
8,000 years ago, Jersey became an island. And exactly at the same time, around the shores of Lake Titicaca, the potato was being domesticated. It took many thousands of years to reach European shores, which it did in the late 16th century, the Spanish conquistadors having brought it back with them. But Europeans didn't like it much, and it took centuries for it to really take its place in the European diet. It only reached Jersey shores by 1740, and 100 years later, in the midst of potato famines and potato blights, we realised here in Jersey that we've got a pretty unbelievable climate for growing potatoes and harvesting them early and making good money in the UK market out of them. So we started in the 1800s to do that. But by the middle of the century, we were only exporting maybe 5,000 or 6,000 tonnes every year. And the initials above this garage here are the initials of Hugh Delahaye, the man we've already mentioned, the man who discovered the variant of potato that would take Jersey from provincial backwater growing only a few thousand tonnes a year to, by the time that date stone was put in there in 1891, we shipped 66,000 tonnes of royal potatoes. And by the end of this century, right when that date stone was put in, Jersey was considered per acre some of the most productive farmland in the whole world. And that's why the Russian prince Kropotkin came to Jersey. He wanted to see what was happening here. How were we producing such extraordinary yields? And how were we dominating the market in England from such a small island? And that's why he came here, and he wrote a book and many articles exploring how we did that. Hugh Delahaye, on the other hand, didn't make anything. He didn't want to exploit his discovery. And when these barns behind me burned down in 1891, who showed up at this property but all of his grateful neighbours? Chisels, hammers and stone in hand, and they rebuilt this barn as a token of their thanks, etching their names on discs and burying them in the walls. And so this date stone is a memorial to Hugh Delahaye, who gave us the royal potato but never wanted to exploit it. He died in 1906 and spent the last few years of his life smoking with friends on a bench overlooking Victoria Avenue. So Harry, are you happy that I dragged you up here?
Yes, mate. I did not understand that such a small farm had such a big impact on Jersey as a whole. It's incredible. So much so that I actually think Jersey Heritage should be looking at this.
Yes, you should. And we are absolutely delighted and grateful for all of the people that have responded to the Hidden Homes series with comments, with subscribes, and for all the people who have got in touch to say and ask whether we can feature their home. If you want us to feature yours, do get in contact. Thank you. Till the next time.